Adam was a trucker, and he loved his job. The open road, the freedom, it was perfect for him. One day he got a call from his dispatcher. There was a special job for him. He needed to deliver an ancient artifact to a museum across the country. The pay was good, better than usual. Adam accepted without hesitation. When he arrived at the warehouse to pick up the artifact, he met Dr. Emily Carter, an archaeologist. She explained the artifact was an ancient relic, a stone idol found in a forgotten temple. It was old, very old. Adam didn't care much about the details. To him, it was just another delivery. He loaded the crate into his truck and set off. The first day was uneventful. Adam drove through the countryside, listening to his favorite radio stations. As night fell, he found a rest stop and decided to call it a night. He parked his truck and settled into his cab. Around midnight, Adam woke up to strange noises. He thought it was just the wind. Then he heard footsteps outside his truck. He looked out but saw nothing, just darkness. He shrugged it off and went back to sleep. But the feeling of unease lingered. The next day, things started getting weird. As he drove, Adam felt like he was being watched. He saw shadows moving in the corner of his eyes. He chalked it up to lack of sleep. But then, he started hearing whispers. They were faint, barely audible, but definitely there. By the third day, the whispers were louder. Adam couldn't ignore them anymore. They seemed to be coming from the crate. He stopped at a diner and called Dr. Carter. She told him the artifact was rumored to be cursed, but she didn't believe in such things. She assured him it was just his imagination. That night, Adam was driving through a forested area. The road was dark and empty. Suddenly, something hit his truck. It was loud, like a massive impact. Adam swerved and almost lost control. He stopped the truck and got out to check. There was nothing there. No sign of an animal or debris. Just his own skid marks on the road. Shaken, Adam got back in the truck. As he started driving again, he saw something in the rearview mirror. A figure, pale and ghostly, standing on the road. He looked back, but it was gone. His heart pounded. He needed to get this delivery over with. The following day, Adam was exhausted. He hadn't slept well in days. As he drove, he started seeing things. Shadows turned into monstrous creatures. Trees seemed to reach out to grab his truck. He knew he was losing it. He called Dr. Carter again, desperate for help. Dr. Carter decided to meet him at the next rest stop. When she arrived, she examined the crate. She looked worried. "This idol is dangerous," she said. "We need to take it back to where it was found." Adam didn't argue. He just wanted the nightmare to end. Adam and Dr. Carter drove together to the temple where the artifact was found. It was in a remote, mountainous area. The journey was long and arduous. Along the way, the hauntings intensified. They saw ghostly apparitions, heard blood-curdling screams, and felt an oppressive presence. Adam almost lost his mind. He felt like he was in a horror movie. Dr. Carter tried to stay calm, but Adam could see the fear in her eyes. They had to keep going. There was no turning back. When they finally reached the temple, it was night. The place was eerie, surrounded by dense forest. They carried the crate inside. As they approached the altar, the hauntings reached a fever pitch. Ghostly figures appeared, trying to stop them. Adam fought them off, swinging his flashlight like a weapon. Dr. Carter chanted something in an ancient language. The figures screamed and vanished. They placed the idol back on the altar. Suddenly, everything went silent. The oppressive feeling lifted. The curse was broken. Adam and Dr. Carter left the temple, exhausted but relieved. The journey back was uneventful. The hauntings had stopped. Adam felt like he could finally breathe again. He dropped Dr. Carter off at the museum and said goodbye. He hoped he'd never see another cursed artifact again. Adam went back to his normal deliveries. He never talked about the cursed freight. Who would believe him? But he knew what he experienced was real. He'd faced ghosts, monsters, and madness, and he'd survived. Jake Miller was a seasoned trucker. He had driven countless miles across the country, hauling goods from coast to coast. One autumn evening, he found himself running late on a delivery. Desperate to make up time, he decided to take a shortcut through an old, abandoned route known as Route 66. Jake had heard stories about Route 66. It had been closed for years due to a tragic accident. Some said the road was haunted, but Jake didn't believe in ghosts. He was a practical man, focused on getting the job done. He figured the stories were just old legends. The sun was setting as Jake turned onto the deserted route. The road was cracked and overgrown with weeds. It was eerily quiet, with no other vehicles in sight. Jake turned on his headlights and drove on, determined to reach his destination on time. As he drove, he started to feel uneasy. The shadows seemed to move and twist in the corners of his vision. He shook his head, trying to shake off the feeling. He turned up the radio, but the music did little to calm his nerves. Suddenly, Jake saw a flash of light in his rearview mirror. He glanced back and saw the outline of a car, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He frowned and checked his mirrors again. There was nothing behind him. The further he drove, the more unsettled he felt. He began to see flashes of a horrific accident. He saw twisted metal, broken glass, and bodies lying on the road. He heard screams and the wail of sirens. The visions were so vivid he had to pull over. Jake stopped the truck and took a deep breath. He rubbed his eyes and looked around. The road was silent and empty. He told himself it was just his imagination, a result of the long hours and stress. He started the truck and continued driving. As he drove, the visions grew stronger. He saw the accident in detail, a head-on collision between a truck and a car. He saw the terrified faces of the victims. He felt their fear and pain. It was as if he were reliving the accident through their eyes. Jake was sweating and shaking. He couldn't understand what was happening. He gripped the steering wheel and tried to focus on the road. But the visions wouldn't stop. They were relentless, filling his mind with horror. He heard whispers, faint at first, but growing louder. The voices were angry, accusing. They blamed him for the accident. Jake shouted back, insisting he had nothing to do with it. But the voices wouldn't listen. They demanded justice. Jake's truck started to behave strangely. The lights flickered and the radio turned on and off. The engine sputtered and threatened to die. Jake knew he had to get off the route, but he felt trapped. The road seemed to stretch on forever. Desperate, Jake stopped the truck again. He got out and looked around. The night was dark and still. He saw a faint glow in the distance and decided to walk towards it. Maybe he could find help, or at least get away from the haunted route. As he walked, the whispers followed him. He felt cold hands brushing against his skin. He saw shadowy figures moving in the darkness. Jake's heart pounded. He knew he had to find a way to appease the spirits, or he might never leave the route alive. Jake reached the source of the glow. It was an old, abandoned gas station. The windows were broken, and the sign was faded. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air was musty, and the floor was covered in dust. He found an old newspaper on the counter. The headline read, "Tragic Accident on Route 66-5 Dead." Jake read the article and learned about the accident that had closed the route. A truck had collided with a car, killing the driver and 4 passengers. The truck driver had survived but disappeared shortly after. Jake realized the spirits were those of the accident victims. They were seeking vengeance on the truck driver who had caused their deaths. They had mistaken Jake for that driver. He had to prove his innocence and find a way to calm the spirits. He searched the gas station for anything that might help. In a drawer, he found a stack of letters. They were from the truck driver, written to his family. Jake read the letters and discovered that the driver had been haunted by guilt and fear. He had disappeared to escape the spirit's wrath. Jake knew he had to do something to set things right. He took the letters and went back to his truck. He sat in the cab and spoke to the spirits. He told them about the letters and the driver's remorse. He assured them that the driver had paid a heavy price for his actions. The whispers grew softer. The air seemed less cold. Jake felt a sense of calm. He knew he had to go to the site of the accident and leave the letters there. It was the only way to give the spirits peace. Jake drove slowly, following the visions to the site of the accident. He found the spot where the collision had occurred. The road was still scarred by the impact. He got out of the truck and placed the letters on the ground. He spoke to the spirits again, asking for their forgiveness. He promised to remember them and to tell their story. He felt a rush of cold air, and the letters disappeared. The road seemed to glow faintly, then returned to its normal, dark state. Jake felt a sense of relief. The visions stopped and the whispers faded away. He got back in his truck and drove off the route. The road felt different now, less menacing. He knew the spirits had found peace. Jake completed his delivery and returned home. He couldn't forget what had happened on Route 66. He knew he had experienced something supernatural, something beyond his understanding. He decided to share his story with others, hoping to honor the memory of those who had died. The story of Jake Miller and the haunted route spread quickly. Truckers and travelers alike listened to his tale with a mix of fear and fascination. Some believed, others were skeptical. But Jake knew what he had experienced was real. He continued to drive, but he avoided abandoned routes and shortcuts. He took the lessons of Route 66 to heart, respecting the road and the spirits that might linger there. He became more cautious and more aware of the lives that could be affected by his actions. Jake Miller's journey was more than just a delivery run. It was a journey into the past, a confrontation with the supernatural, and a mission to bring peace to restless spirits. His story lived on, a testament to the power of redemption and the importance of remembering those who had come before. Mike was a seasoned trucker. He had been driving big rigs for over 20 years. One foggy night, he was hauling a load of lumber across the state. The road ahead was barely visible, shrouded in thick fog. The headlights of his truck cast eerie beams that struggled to pierce the dense mist. As he drove, Mike noticed something odd in his rearview mirror. A truck was following him closely. Its headlights were just as bright, cutting through the fog behind him. Mike didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't uncommon to have company on such long hauls. But after a while, he began to feel uneasy. Every time he changed lanes, the truck behind him did the same. It mirrored his every move. Mike sped up, and so did the shadow truck. He slowed down, and it did too. No matter what he did, he couldn't shake it. Mike's hands tightened on the wheel. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard. It was just past midnight. He hadn't seen a rest stop in miles. The fog was getting thicker. He decided to pull over and let the other truck pass. He found a wide shoulder and pulled his rig to a stop. He waited, expecting the other truck to drive past. But it didn't. It stopped too, just a few feet behind him. Mike's heart pounded. He couldn't see the driver. The cab of the shadow truck was dark, its windows opaque. Mike rolled down his window and leaned out. "Hey, what's your problem?" he shouted into the night. There was no response. The only sound was the hum of his engine and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Deciding not to wait any longer, Mike pulled back onto the road. The shadow truck followed. His mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He remembered an old truck stop a few miles ahead. It was rarely used but might offer some safety in numbers. He drove as fast as he dared, the fog still thick around him. The shadow truck stayed right on his tail. Mike's palms were sweaty and his heart raced. The road seemed endless. Finally, he saw the faint glow of the truck stop's neon sign through the fog. Mike pulled into the lot and parked near the entrance. He jumped out of his cab and ran inside. The interior was dimly lit, with a few old booths and a counter. An elderly man behind the counter looked up, surprised. "Help, there's a truck following me," Mike blurted out. The man raised an eyebrow. "A truck? Out in this fog?" Mike nodded, panting. "It follows my every move. I can't see the driver. It's like a ghost truck." The old man frowned. "Son, you must be tired. Ain't no such thing as ghost trucks." Mike turned and looked out the window. The shadow truck was parked just outside. Its headlights were off, and it sat there, silent and menacing. "Look for yourself," Mike said, pointing. The man came around the counter and peered outside. His eyes widened. "Well, I'll be damned. Never seen anything like it." The old man introduced himself as Hank. He had been running the truck stop for decades. "I've heard stories," he said, his voice low. "Old legends about a shadow truck that follows drivers through the fog. They say it's a harbinger of death." Mike's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Hank sighed. "They say if the shadow truck catches you, you're never seen again. It's a curse, or maybe a warning. No one knows for sure." Mike felt a chill run down his spine. "What can I do?" Hank rubbed his chin. "Some say you can break the curse by confronting it. Others say you have to outrun it, but no one really knows." Mike looked back at the shadow truck. It was still there, waiting. He knew he couldn't stay at the truck stop forever. He had to find a way to escape its pursuit. Mike decided to confront the shadow truck. He took a deep breath and stepped outside. The fog swirled around him, thick and suffocating. He walked slowly towards the shadow truck, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached, he saw that the cab was empty. There was no driver. The windows were dark, reflecting only the fog and the dim light from the truck stop. "Why are you following me?" Mike shouted. His voice echoed in the still night. There was no response. He reached out and touched the door handle. It was cold, like touching ice. Suddenly, a wave of fear washed over him. He pulled his hand back, trembling. Hank appeared at the door of the truck stop. "Mike, be careful," he called out. Mike took a deep breath and grabbed the handle again. This time he pulled the door open. Inside, the cab was empty. It was dark and silent, with no sign of life. "What's going on?" Mike muttered to himself. He climbed into the cab and sat in the driver's seat. The interior was cold and smelled faintly of diesel. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. Mike jumped, his heart racing. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. Panic set in as he pounded on the windows. "Help! Let me out," he shouted. But no one came. Suddenly, the door of the truck opened on its own. Mike jumped out of the cabin, panting in the cold air. He came back to his truck and got in the cabin. Mike's mind raced as he tried to figure out what was happening. He felt a strange sense of déjà vu, like he had been in this situation before. Memories of past drives flashed through his mind. He remembered a night, years ago, when he had been driving through a similar fog. He had seen a shadow truck then too, but he had dismissed it as a trick of the light. Now he realized that the shadow truck had been following him for years, waiting for the right moment. Mike closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. He had to confront his fear and face the shadow truck head-on. He started the engine and drove back onto the road. The shadow truck followed, its headlights piercing the fog. Mike drove faster, his hand steady on the wheel. He knew he couldn't outrun it, but he could face it. The road stretched out before him, endless and dark. Mike felt a strange sense of calm as he drove. He knew that this was his last chance. He had to break the curse, or he would be lost forever. Mike drove through the fog, the shadow truck close behind. He felt a sense of determination as he pressed the accelerator. The road twisted and turned, but he didn't falter. He knew that he had to keep going. Suddenly, the fog began to lift. The road ahead became clearer, and Mike saw a bridge in the distance. He knew that this was the final test. If he could cross the bridge, he would be free. He drove faster, the shadow truck right on his tail. The bridge loomed ahead, its structure dark and foreboding. Mike's heart pounded as he approached. He knew that this was it. This was the moment of truth. As he reached the bridge, the shadow truck pulled up alongside him. Mike glanced over and saw a figure in the driver's seat. It was a dark, shadowy figure with glowing eyes. Mike felt a surge of fear, but he didn't look away. He kept his eyes on the road and drove forward. The shadow truck tried to push him off the road, but Mike held his ground. With a final burst of speed, Mike crossed the bridge. The shadow truck swerved and disappeared into the fog. Mike felt a wave of relief wash over him as he reached the other side. Mike pulled over and stopped his truck. He took a deep breath and looked around. The fog was lifting, and the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. He had made it. He was free. He climbed out of his cab and looked back at the bridge. The shadow truck was gone, vanished into the mist. Mike knew that he had broken the curse. He had faced his fear and won. Hank's words echoed in his mind. Some say you can break the curse by confronting it. Mike realized that he had done just that. He had confronted the shadow truck and survived. He got back into his truck and started the engine. The road ahead was clear, and he felt a sense of peace as he drove away. He knew that he would never forget this night, but he also knew that he was stronger for having faced it. As the sun rose, Mike drove on, leaving the shadow truck and its curse behind. He felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. He had faced his darkest fear and come out on the other side, and he knew that he could face anything that came his way. The road stretched out before him, endless and inviting. Mike smiled and pressed the accelerator. He was ready for whatever lay ahead.